Welcome to the Stories with Agnes E channel. Today, I bring you a captivating tale about unsettling discoveries, deeply buried secrets, and confronting a truth that should have remained hidden. What happens when the past hits us head-on and our peace crumbles? Let's find out together by listening to Melanie's story. I met Mario in a far-from-romantic way a food poisoning incident that sent me straight to the hospital. He was a resident doctor, and I was just a tired and scared patient. But when he discharged me, he smiled and invited me for coffee. I accepted, not knowing then that this moment would be the beginning of a relationship that would change my life. Mario was ambitious, passionate about medicine, always caught between shifts and seminars. One day, he asked me to accompany him to an important event in his field. I wasn't Thrilletta. Medical seminar didn't sound like fun, but something in the way he looked at me convinced me. So, on the morning of our departure, we packed our bags and headed to the city where the conference was taking place. The hall was enormous, filled with elegant, professional people, their voices murmuring discussions I didn't even try to understand. After a while, the atmosphere became overwhelming. I needed air. I stepped outside, taking deep breaths and trying to gather my thoughts. That's when I saw her. A woman impeccably dressed, with a cigarette between her fingers and a cup of coffee in her other hand. She seemed lost in her own thoughts, exuding an elegance that drew the eyes of those around her. I stared at her, fascinated, without understanding why I felt a strange familiarity. Then she put out her cigarette, looked up, and my heart stopped. That woman had my exact face. The same eye shape, the same cheekbones, the same slightly mysterious smile. I felt a pit in my stomach, and my mind screamed unanswered questions. Who was she? How was this possible? Without thinking, I took a step toward her. But at that very moment, she tossed her empty cup into a trash can and turned toward a side exit. I wanted to shout to stop her, but my legs were frozen. When I finally snapped out of it, I ran after her. I turned the same corner I had seen her take, but she was gone. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Was it just a coincidence, or was there something much deeper, much more unsettling going on? Trying to recover from the shock, I took a deep breath and headed back to the hall. My heart was still pounding, and my steps were unsteady, as if reality itself was shaking beneath me. I had to tell Mario. I had to tell him what I had seen, but when I found him, he was completely absorbed in the speech of a renowned professor, jotting something down on his phone. It was clear this wasn't the right moment. Breathing unevenly, I forced my voice to remain calm and whispered to him that I had run into an acquaintance and was stepping out for a bit, but he could contact me if he needed me. He didn't even look at me, just nodded absent-mindedly. That was good. That gave me time. I stepped back into the long, cold hallway, my eyes frantically scanning every corner. I had her face in my mind, her image. My image was imprinted in my mind like a ghost. I had to find her. I had to know who she was. I started moving quickly through the crowd, analyzing every face, every silhouette. Was I going crazy? Could it have just been an illusion? A bizarre trick of my mind? No, it couldn't be. I had seen her clearly. I checked the women's restroom, nearly slamming the door in my haste. The cold mirrors reflected the faces of a few women touching up their makeup, oblivious to my turmoil. She wasn't there. I stepped out, almost running. I wandered through the maze of corridors, opening doors I shouldn't have, searching hidden corners, looking for a clue, anything. Then I stepped outside again where I had seen her the first time. Nothing. It was as if she had evaporated into thin air. A strange feeling washed over me, a mix of fear and frustration. What if I never found her? What if she wasn't real? Or worse, what if she was real and didn't want to be found? I ran my hand over my forehead, trying to gather my thoughts. My hands were trembling, and the air felt thicker than before. I looked around at the people calmly going about their conversations, their lives, unaware of the chaos raging in my mind. But I knew the truth. I had seen her, and I had to find out who she was. On the way to the car, I felt Mario's gaze on me, analytical, cautious. He was used to dealing with people going through strange episodes, but this time it wasn't a patient in front of him. It was me. Frustration washed over me like a wave of fire. I had found her. She was there, in that car, slowly moving through the parking lot, heading toward the exit. Without thinking, I opened the door of our car and almost yanked Mario out of his thoughts. "Get in now. We're following that car." Confused but accustomed to my determined tone, Mario complied, quickly starting the engine. I scanned the parking lot, trying to keep visual contact with the mysterious vehicle, but the crowd was our enemy. Cars backing up, people casually crossing, annoying honks, everything was conspiring against us. "We're losing her! We're losing her!" I heard my own voice trembling with nerves. Mario forced his way between two parked cars, but by the time we reached the exit, her car was gone. I scanned the street in both directions, hoping to catch a glimpse of her in time, but she was nowhere to be seen. She had vanished again, just like the first time. I clenched my fists, feeling a mix of panic and frustration. It couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't just be a twist of fate. A woman with my face, appearing and disappearing just as I tried to approach her? "What the hell is going on?" I muttered, almost unaware I was speaking. Mario was looking at me now, trying to understand what was troubling me so much. Who was in that car? I forced a calm expression, though my heart was racing. "An old acquaintance," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But it seems I've lost her." Mario sighed and merged into traffic without further questions. But I knew this wasn't over. I wasn't going to give up. That woman existed, and I would find her, no matter what. I stared through the windshield, trying to control my breathing, but my thoughts were spinning like a storm. I had lost her again. For the second time, as we drove away from the building, I let my gaze drift over the road, scanning every car, every red light, absurdly hoping I'd see that silhouette again. But nothing. The city seemed indifferent to the madness consuming me. My mind raced through scenario after scenario. What if it was just a bizarre coincidence, a woman who just looked like me? But no, it couldn't be just that. Her face was identical to mine. As we approached the hotel, my anger began to transform into something else. A much more unsettling feeling. Not just frustration, but fear. Because deep down, I felt that this woman hadn't appeared in my path by chance. And somehow, she was going to reappear. I invited my mother and grandmother over without telling them the real reason. Each of them thought it would just be a regular visit, a family dinner. But I had other plans. I wanted the truth. I could feel it close, like a shadow that had been following me ever since I saw that woman. When I opened the door, my mother came in first, surprised to see my grandmother there too. My grandmother, in turn, crossed her arms and gave a suspicious look. It was clear that something was hanging in the air, an old secret buried deep. I waited for them to sit down, then dropped the bomb. "I want you to tell me the truth about my birth." My mother set her cup down with a slight tremble. My grandmother took a deep breath and looked at her daughter, as if waiting to see what she would say first. "I don't know what you're talking about," my mother said quickly, but her voice betrayed unease. "Yes, you do. I saw her. That woman. The one who looks exactly like me." A cold shiver passed over their faces. My grandmother looked away, and my mother froze. "I don't understand what you're saying." "Yes, you do," I burst out. "And I want the truth. Who is that woman? Why does she look exactly like me?" Their silence was unbearable. I was tired of the lies. "If you don't tell me, I'll find out on my own." My grandmother sighed deeply, and her hands trembled. I saw in her eyes that moment of hesitation, that conflict between hiding something and letting the truth come to the surface. "It's time," she murmured. My mother turned to her abruptly, furious. "No, Mom! Don't tell her anything!" But it was too late. "You weren't born alone," my grandmother said in a weak but clear voice. "You had a twin sister." The air was knocked out of my lungs. I felt everything around me falling apart, my reality, my entire life. What?" My mother hid her face in her hands. My grandmother leaned back, exhausted, as if a decades-old burden had finally been lifted from her shoulders. "Your sister, you were never supposed to know about her." My heart was pounding wildly. If I had a twin sister, where was she now? And more importantly, why had this been hidden from me for so long? The shock paralyzed every thought. I felt the world I knew crumbling beneath me, like a sandcastle swept away by merciless waves. Lies. Everything had been a lie, not just about my sister, but also about my father. I had believed my father was dead. I had mourned a non-existent father, lit candles for him, grieved in silence, and the reality was that he hadn't even bothered to stay. He had disappeared when he found out my mother was pregnant. Not just a coward, but a stranger I had never truly known. But that wasn't what hurt the most. A sister. Another part of me, a parallel life. Brutally torn from mine, hidden, denied, erased. A sister who had lived without me just as I had lived without her. And it hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been a twist of fate. It had been a choice. A transaction. Her adoptive family, a wealthy family, had essentially bought the right to raise her. They had offered money to my mother so that I could have a better life. I had grown up with hardships, struggles, with a mother who broke her back to keep me afloat, and yet, somewhere, another girl with my face had lived differently. In a wealthy home, without hardships, without knowing that, just a few steps away, her sister was living a completely different life. I felt betrayed, furious, torn apart by a mix of emotions I couldn't name. I didn't want to hear justifications. I didn't want to understand their reasons. I just wanted the truth. Who was she? How had she lived? Did she know anything about me? And above all, if I found her, would she accept me? Or would I just be a closed chapter in a story she didn't want to reopen? Anger and confusion overwhelmed me. I stood in front of my mother and grandmother, but I could only see them as strangers now. What kind of choices had they made in my name? Why had they been so selfish? They had let an entire life, a sister, a half of me, remain hidden and silent, and now, when I found out, they were asking me to let it go, to forget her, to let her move on, just as I had done until now. But how could I? How could I forget that somewhere in the world there is a woman who looks like me, who shares the same features and perhaps even the same dreams? A woman who was given away, like an object no longer needed, just because I had to be saved. Their lies were so deep that they suffocated me. I thought I knew everything about my life, but now I felt like an uninformed child, trapped in a false reality built on secrets and compromises. I couldn't believe that my mother, the woman who raised me, had lied to me for so long, and my grandmother, who loved me so much, had so many reasons to protect me from the bitter truth. The truth that I wasn't the only one in this story. But what did they really want? For me to forget everything? I didn't know what to do. Searching for my sister would risk everything. Maybe it would bring chaos. Maybe I would find her, and she would reject it all, considering me an intruder. But on the other hand, it was impossible for me to continue without answers. There was a part of me that I couldn't ignore. My mind came up with dozens of scenarios, but my heart told me that I couldn't let it all remain a question. I had been left to swim in murky waters. A sister, a bond that had been broken from the start. And even if I were afraid, even if I faced rejection, I couldn't live with the thought of not trying. I would search for her even if everything collapsed around me. My search, finally, seemed to reach a point where answers were forming, but the truth was far more complex and unsettling than I had imagined. After my insistence, my grandmother and mother finally gave in and told me about the family that had adopted my sister. An influential family, well known in the city, with strong business connections, who had done everything to protect her from our past. The search began with uncertain steps, but my determination was stronger than any obstacle. I obtained the necessary information and found out that my sister worked in an imposing building that dominated the city skyline. That entire building, the whole atmosphere, seemed to reflect a life I had never had, a life full of privilege, comfort, and promises. I applied for an interview there, using all my resources to penetrate this inaccessible place. No one knew who I was or what I was looking for, so I slipped in without drawing attention, without making waves. My goal was clear: to reach her, my sister, no matter the cost. When I stepped into the vast, cold office with glass walls that took your breath away, I had the feeling that everything would end there. Although I had never imagined what she might look like, I thought I would be met with curiosity or perhaps a hint of surprise, but I didn't even have time to prepare for what was about to happen. The moment I entered, her cold, silent eyes lifted from behind the desk. That gaze didn't scrutinize me at all. Instead, it seemed as if she had been waiting for me for a long time. She remained silent for a few seconds, and that air of superiority, of control, hit me harder than any word. She looked at me with a mix of disdain and familiarity, as if everything had already been written. She rested her hands on the desk and stood up slightly. There was no expression of astonishment, no wonder. She wasn't surprised at all. She knew. She knew everything. With a subtle smile and unsettling calmness, she told me, without a trace of emotion, that she had known I would come one day. Nothing was accidental. Nothing had been by chance. She knew of my existence, and all this time, she had never sought me out. I was left speechless. I still didn't understand what was really happening. My thoughts were swirling, but something in her eyes told me that this moment had been prepared long before I arrived. In a way, I had expected something like this, but not this categorical rejection, this complete disregard for any blood ties. I had thought we could build something, anything, even a shred of a relationship. But her adoptive parents had made it clear to her. We had nothing in common. We were just a family of poor people who didn't deserve even a fraction of her attention. I understood then that nothing I believed made sense anymore. They told me I was just an intruder, a collection of unimportant memories, a shattered dream. Those people had trained her to believe that everything around her was a scheme. She believed I was only looking for her for money, that I came with dirty intentions, and that blood ties held no value in the face of status or wealth. I didn't exist in her eyes. I felt humiliated, but also furious. I had searched for everything and received only rejection. A bitter taste lingered on my tongue like a trace of toxicity I couldn't wash away. What had I gained? I had brought to light a reality I didn't want to accept and discovered that I had no right to be there, in her world. When I returned home, Mario tried his best to comfort me. He knew how much I wanted to find her, to understand, to make a place for myself in her life. But somehow, with every calm word, with every gesture of support, I felt more deeply trapped in my own helplessness. I had nothing left, no meaning. My search had ended abruptly, like a road blocked by an immense stone I didn't have the strength to move. Before me lay only a deep void, and Mario tried to make me forget what had happened. But I couldn't forget. Not yet. The pain was too fresh. In the end, I understood that some secrets are better left unspoken, buried deep, because the truth can be a burden far heavier than we can imagine. My life changed forever after that encounter, but I learned a valuable lesson. Perhaps some mysteries should never be revealed. What do you think? Should we always seek the truth, even if it can destroy everything we know about ourselves? Or are there times when silence is wiser? Share your thoughts in the comments.